Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cyclotron. Well, today I thought I would do something a little different, talk about the top 5 things that you should never do on a motorcycle. Now, I don't want this to be a preachy video or anything like that. These are just things that occur to me. I'd be interested in your thoughts and let me know in the comments section if you agree, if you have your own list of things. But let's start out with number 1 here, and that is riding a motorcycle that is beyond the capabilities of the rider. Now, in essence, with modern motorcycles and modern performance, pretty much any motorcycle you ride is gonna have capabilities beyond what the average rider can deliver. But I'm talking about a gross mismatch between the bike's capabilities or size and the abilities of the rider, and it could go both ways. So when I said that, maybe some of you envisioned a new 16-year-old freshly minted rider from the MSF class going straight to his local dealer and buying a Hayabusa, and obviously that would be a mismatch of performance and capabilities for somebody with no experience. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other is having a lot of experience and riding a bike that's well below your capabilities. And I saw this firsthand when I was riding my son's Z125 Pro. We had traded it in for an MTO3 a couple years ago, and I was riding it to the dealership to make the trade, and I was having a lot of fun on that bike because I could go full throttle. I was taking traffic circles as fast as I possibly could, and in fact the closest I've come to wrecking in recent memory was taking that Z125 Pro too quickly into a traffic circle. So I wasn't showing the bike the proper respect. I mean, it's still a motorcycle, and a 125 just seemed like I could just thrash it, and you can, but you could quickly overload yourself if you're not careful. So I'd say there's 2 ends of that spectrum. That you never want to do on a motorcycle, and that's riding impaired. Now that could be either due to substances or fatigue, illness, a lot of different things. Back in my younger days, I foolishly rode my 535 Virago home after going to a bar, listening to a band, and having about 6 beers in quick succession. And I found my balance was extremely poor. I was riding home at night, and got home, but I felt like I wanted to kiss the ground because it was a harrowing experience. I don't know why it didn't occur to me just to stop and hail a cab, but certainly that was the last time I rode under those circumstances. These days, if I'm going to ride, I don't consume anything like that the day of a ride. It's just not worth it to me to not have as good a reactions or perception of what's going on around me. I like to bring my full attention to what I'm doing, so I don't do that. And like I said, I learned the hard way, but I got lucky. It's not something I want to press my luck on, though, for sure. I was riding with a group a few years ago, and we stopped for lunch, and I was surprised when 2 or 3 of them had like 4 beers in a half-hour time period. And sure enough, the guy that was riding behind me was one of them, and there was a road hazard I had to slow down for, couldn't avoid, and the guy almost ended up in the back of my bike. So that was the last time I rode with those people. I thought it was pretty poor judgment, and you know, if they want to do that, that's their deal. I don't want to be associated with it and put myself at risk. So that's just me. Number 3, I would say, is not having the proper amount of routine maintenance. And it's funny because that person I mentioned that almost ended up into my taillight was telling about how he had this wobble coming from his front tire or his front end when he was going under 15 miles an hour, but above 15 miles an hour it was fine. And then later on he realized that his air pressure was only like 15 psi in his front tire instead of 35 psi. And I remember joking with him, it's like, yeah, if you ride fast enough you don't even have to have any air in your tire. And he didn't really appreciate that. But you know, routine maintenance is important to keep the bike running smoothly. Certainly you don't want to have a catastrophic failure due to not having enough oil, or oil that's in poor condition, or having a bike that overheats if you're low on coolant for a liquid cooled bike, or a bike that just runs poorly. It could put you at risk out in traffic if you need to quickly accelerate to avoid a hazard, or you know, if you don't have brakes that work as well as they should. So I would put routine maintenance, or not having enough routine maintenance, as number 3 on my list. And this is really no particular order, just things I want to go through. Number 4, and I have to say I'm kind of guilty of this, is not doing a pre-ride check. So, you know, they tell you the acronym, the T-clocks, and it's a good thing to follow. You know, especially if you ride a newer bike, it's tempting to think, I got a new bike and I don't have to look at these things, but it's probably well advised to get into that habit of checking the bike beforehand. And the last thing I'd say you never want to do on a motorcycle, and that is to not wear the appropriate gear. Now, again, I don't want this to be preachy, because I generally ride wearing a lot of gear, but I'm not wearing a tracksuit either. You know, ultimately I should be wearing a tracksuit every day for the ultimate protection. I've got a hard spine protector that goes under my jacket that gives way more protection than the pad in my jacket, but I'm usually wearing the jacket with the pad and not the extra spine protector. But I generally wear the gear. Well, I say generally, I can't think of a time I don't. There's times where I don't wear my reflective vest. I generally do, but not always. I'm wearing it right now, and it's got some embedded elements that fluoresce when they hit with lighting, so it provides extra visibility at night, which is important. But you know, I just got back last week. I had a 15-hour drive back from Taylor, South Carolina, where More Mafia did the tune on my bike, and I had the bike on a trailer. It was a 15-hour drive home, and by the time I got my bike off the trailer, it was 10 o'clock at night. But you could bet I was just dying to get that bike out and seeing how it felt and sounded and all that. So, which is very atypical of me. I had a pair of slip-on tennis shoes, Skechers, I think, and no helmet, no gloves. I just rode down the street to my first cul-de-sac, made a U-turn, and came home, which is, again, very atypical of me. And I mentioned that story to my oldest son. He goes, funny you should mention that. He goes, I have a coworker who just last week was telling me how he got seriously messed up and had about 2 years of rehab when he was working on his S1000 at home, and decided to take a short trip down the street to test it out, and his neighbor suddenly backed out of the driveway right into him. So you just never know. I'd say all these risk profiles are really things that mostly have the effect over long periods of time. They're habitual. You know, the neighboring state of Missouri has roadsides, has signs along the highway that list the number of fatalities year to date, and the percentage of those fatalities involving people not wearing their seatbelt. And it turns out that consistently 2/3 of the road fatalities are for people not wearing a seatbelt. So these are people who obviously day in and day out drive without wearing their seatbelt, and that's their choice, even though it's a legal requirement that they wear a seatbelt. But again, ultimately it's their choice, and it turns out it's a pretty bad choice from a risk standpoint. And that's how I feel about gear and helmets in particular. I think it's up to the individual, but it's a very high risk proposition if you habitually don't wear your gear, particularly your helmet, I think. But again, you're on a continuum. I mean, it's inherently more risky riding a motorcycle than it is driving a car, so there's that. So really my philosophy is I'd much rather take the risk of riding a motorcycle and manage those risks as effectively as I can. So that's my list. Please let me know what you think in the comments section. Do you agree with what I've lined out here? Do you have your own view of things? Please let me know, and thanks for watching, and stay tuned for future videos.